Papa, I am not asking for your permission. I am telling you, I am going to marry her. Marry who?
The house girl? The house girl? The cleaner my wife hired off the street? Say her name. What did you say? You have never once said her name.
This is becoming a disaster.
I've never seen Chief challenged like this.
Lord have mercy.
Bring her here. Let us settle this once and for all. In front of everybody.
So you are the girl bringing shame into my family?
Sir, I never wanted any of this.
She didn't. I did. Before you throw her out of this house, Papa, you should read what is in my hand. Because it did not come from her. It came from your own bedroom.
Oh my God, that's...
Before you throw her out of this house, Papa, Kelvin says, his voice breaking now, you should read what is in my hand. Because it did not come from her, it came from your own bedroom. Mrs. Adeyemi Coco's wine glass slips from her fingers and shatters against the marble floor. Nobody in that room, not the chief, not the guests, not even Eva herself, knew that in the next 10 minutes, an entire family's secrets were about to spill out faster than the wine now pooling red across white marble. If you want to see how a poor cleaner's quiet faith brought down a billionaire's pride, stay with me till the end of this story and subscribe, because what happens next you will not believe. Now let us go back to where this all began, 6 months earlier, in a small compound in Aba, where a girl named Eva Chidinma Okafor was folding her only 2 school uniforms into a plastic bag, preparing to leave everything she knew behind. Eva was the last child of Mr. Godwin Okafor, a bicycle repairer whose small shed sat at the edge of Ariaria market. Her mother sold pepper and tomatoes from a wooden tray she carried on her head every morning before sunrise. They were poor, but they were proud, and they were, above everything else, prayerful. When it was time for Eva to sit her WAEC examination, the school fees, the exam registration, the textbooks, all of it came to a number her father simply did not have. So Mr. Okafor did what many desperate fathers do. He swallowed his pride and went to his elder brother, Chief Emeka Okafor, a man who had made modest money, importing spare parts, and who never let anyone forget it. Blood is blood, Emeka had said, counting out the naira notes slowly, deliberately, making his younger brother wait for everyone. But brother, this is not a gift, this is a loan. I expect it back. Eva sat her WAEC. She passed with results that made her mother weep with joy in the kitchen, where no one could see her. But the promised repayment never came, because the bicycle she'd brought in barely enough to feed 4 mouths, let alone settle a debt. Months passed. Then one Sunday afternoon, a letter arrived at the Okafor compound, delivered by a boy on a motorcycle. Mr. Okafor's hands shook as he opened it. It was from Emeka's lawyer. If the debt was not settled within 30 days, criminal proceedings for obtaining under false pretense would begin. His own brother's signature was at the bottom. That night, Eva could not sleep. She lay on her mat, listening to her mother crying softly into a wrapper, so the neighbors would not hear, and her father's voice, low and broken, saying the same sentence over and over. How did we come to this? How did we come to this? By morning, Eva had made a decision. I will go to Lagos, she told her parents. One of my classmates said the estates in Ikoyi and Lekki are always looking for house help. I will work. I will send money. I will not let Uncle Emeka put you in a cell. Her mother wept and begged her not to go. Lagos swallowed young girls like Eva whole, she said, and spat out only broken pieces. But Eva was firm. Before she boarded the bus, she knelt beside her mother in their small room, and her mother held both her hands and prayed over her, a long, trembling prayer, asking God to be a wall around her daughter, a fire behind her, and a covering above her, because a mother sending her only daughter into a strange city with strange men has only one weapon left: prayer. Eva carried that prayer with her the entire journey, folded into her chest like the little money she had, tucked into her wrapper, along with a small pocket Bible her mother pressed into her palm at the very last second. "Whatever they offer you that God did not permit," her mother whispered, "refuse it, even if it looks like your only way out." Eva would remember those words more times than she ever imagined. The agency that placed domestic staff in Lagos's wealthiest homes was run by a stern woman everyone simply called Madame Rose. She looked Eva over the way a trader inspects tomatoes, checking for bruises, checking for defects. "You will go to the Adeyemi Coker house," Madame Rose said. "Big people, big money. Chief Augustine owns half the shipping containers coming into this country. But listen to me, girl." She lowered her voice. 3 girls have left that house in the last 2 years, not because of Madame, because of the young master. He comes home from London every few months, and trouble comes with him. Keep your head down. Do your work. Ask. No questions. Eva nodded, though something cold settled in her stomach. The estate itself took her breath away. Gates taller than her father's entire shed, a driveway lined with imported palm trees, a fountain that ran even when no one was watching it. Inside, marble floors gleamed so brightly, Eva was afraid to walk on them in her slippers. The head housekeeper, a warm, tired-eyed woman named Madame Comfort, met her at the staff entrance. "You are the new one," Comfort said, studying her. "How old are you?" 20, ma." Comfort's face softened with something like pity. "Listen to me carefully, because I will only say this once. This house pays well. The madame is kind, in her own quiet way. The chief is proud, but fair with salary. But there is a son." She paused. "When he is around, you stay close to other staff. Never alone in a room with him. Never. I have seen what happens to the ones who don't listen." Eva thought of her mother's prayer. She thought of the letter threatening her father's arrest. She had nowhere else to go. "I understand, ma," she said quietly. "I will be careful." Before Eva ever crossed his path directly, the household had already lived through years of quiet, documented cruelty, the kind that never makes it into police reports, only into the lowered eyes of staff who have learned survival means silence. There was the story of Blessing, a maid 3 years before Eva, who left in the middle of the night with nothing but a black nylon bag and never collected her final month's salary. Nobody asked why. Everybody knew why. There was the story the gateman, Baba Musa, told in hushed tones, how young Master Kelvin, home on his first holiday from university abroad, had once cornered a girl in the boys' quarters, and when she screamed, it was the girl who was quietly let go the next morning for theft, a theft nobody could ever produce evidence of. There was the driver, Emeka, not to be confused with Eva's uncle, who had once tried to report an incident to Chief Augustine directly. The chief had listened, face unreadable, then said only, "Boys will be boys when they come back from abroad. Just keep an eye on things." No investigation, no consequence, just a warning issued to the girl to behave herself better, as though she were the offense, not the target of one. And there was Madame Comfort herself, who had watched Kelvin grow from a spoiled toddler into a young man who never once heard the word no mean anything permanent, because his father had spent 2 decades removing every obstacle from his path, including, apparently, the dignity of the women who worked in his own house. Staff whispered, when Kelvin's flight from London was announced, they changed their walking patterns, avoided empty hallways, made sure never to be the last one doing rounds at night. This was not paranoia. This was inherited memory, the corporate knowledge of an entire staff quietly protecting itself, because the people meant to protect them never had. Eva heard all these stories in fragments over her first 3 weeks. She said nothing. She simply prayed a little harder each night and made sure the small lock on her quarters door, a lock Madame Comfort had personally installed and told no one about, was always, always secured. To understand what came later, you must first understand who Eva was underneath the apron and the folded headscarf. She was not loud. She never raised her voice, not even when other maids gossiped cruelly about her plain dressing or her thick Aba accent. She was not naive either. She understood exactly what kind of danger a house like this represented for a girl like her. But there was something in Eva that the Adeyemi Coker household had never encountered before. A woman who had already decided, long before she ever stepped into that estate, exactly who she was going to be. Back in Aba, Eva had watched girls her age, her closest friends from childhood, slowly drift into relationships with older men who promised phones, hair money, upkeep. She watched the same friends grow bitter, grow tired, grow ashamed in ways they could never quite name. And Eva, still a teenager herself, had knelt one night in her mother's church and made a quiet vow to God that she would keep herself, body and heart, until the day she was lawfully married, not because she judged the others, but because something in her spirit told her that this one decision, kept faithfully, would one day be the very thing that protected her when nothing else could. She asked God, specifically, to guard her by all means, not just from temptation, but from men who would not take no for an answer. This vow was not weakness. It was the quiet, invisible architecture holding up everything Eva did in that house. She was not weak. She was watching. She observed the household's rhythms, memorized the routes to avoid, learned exactly when the chief's car pulled in, and exactly when it did not, adjusted her own movements accordingly, all while performing every duty asked of her without complaint, without drama, without ever once giving anyone in that house a single reason to call her difficult. Her restraint was not surrender. It was strategy, and it was faith, working together in a girl the household had badly underestimated. It happened on a Thursday, 2 weeks after Kelvin arrived home for the holidays. Eva was mopping the corridor outside the guest wing, later than usual, because the chief had hosted a dinner that ran long. She heard footsteps behind her, unhurried, deliberate. "You're the new one," Kelvin said, leaning against the wall, a glass of something amber in his hand. "Nobody told me they hired somebody this beautiful to mop floors." Eva kept her eyes on the mop. "Good evening, sir. I'm almost finished here." "No rush." He stepped closer. "Come, let's talk. I get bored in this house." "I have to finish before Madame Comfort locks the supply room, sir," Eva said, already moving the bucket toward the stairs, putting distance between them, with the practiced calm of someone who had rehearsed this exact scenario in her mind 100 times. He reached for her wrist. She did not flinch, did not scream, did not pull away dramatically. She simply turned, met his eyes with a steadiness that surprised him, and said quietly, "Sir, please, I respect this house. Please respect me too." Something in her tone, not fear, not defiance, just an unshakable calm, made him let go. He laughed it off, called her serious babe, mockingly, and walked away. Eva finished mopping. Her hands did not shake until she reached her quarters, locked the door, and sank to her knees in prayer. The countdown had already begun, though no one in that house knew it yet. 2 weeks later, Kelvin tried again, this time more carefully planned. He asked Madame Comfort to send the new girl to deliver fresh towels to the guest suite personally late in the evening when most staff had gone home. Eva sensed the setup the moment Comfort relayed the instruction, the older woman's eyes carrying an unspoken warning. Eva went anyway. Refusing an order from the young master's own household would raise more danger than complying carefully. She knocked, left the towels just inside the door, without stepping fully into the room, and turned to leave immediately. Kelvin, waiting behind the door in a robe, blocked her path. "Why do you always run from me?" he said, an edge of frustration creeping into his charm now. "I am not like the others you may have heard about." "I have not heard anything, sir," Eva lied evenly. "I only know my job, and my job is done." He stepped closer. She stepped back, calmly, deliberately, until her hand found the door handle behind her. "Good night, sir," she said, and left before he could respond, her heart hammering, but her face betraying nothing. That night, Walking back to the staff quarters, she passed old driver Emeka polishing the chief's car under a security light. He said nothing, but he watched her pass with quiet, careful eyes, the eyes of a man who had seen this pattern before and hoped this time it would end differently. The countdown ticked forward. Nobody could yet see what it was counting toward, but it was counting. The third attempt was the most dangerous. Kelvin, drunk and frustrated after weeks of failed pursuit, cornered Eva late one night near the boys' quarters in a stretch of the compound with no security cameras and no other staff nearby. "Enough of this," he said, his voice slurred, his grip firmer than before. "You think you are better than every other girl who has worked in this house? Who do you think you are?" For the first time, real fear moved through Eva's chest. She thought of her mother's prayer. She thought of the small pocket Bible still tucked under her pillow. And in that moment, with no one around to help her, she did the only thing she had left. She began, quietly, urgently, to pray out loud. Not performing, not dramatic, just a desperate whispered plea. "Lord, you said you would be a wall around me. Please, Lord, please." What happened next, staff would later whisper about for weeks. Security lights the estate had not used in months flickered on unexpectedly, tripped by a stray estate cat crossing the motion sensor. The sudden light startled Kelvin, and in that same instant, Baba Musa's voice called out from the gatehouse, checking on the light, his footsteps approaching. Kelvin released her arm and stumbled back into the shadows, muttering something about how she wasn't even worth the trouble. Eva did not wait to see if he meant it. She walked briskly back to her quarters, locked the door, and wept, not from despair, but from a strange, overwhelming relief that felt too precise, too timed to be coincidence. She did not know it yet, but that night marked the last time Kelvin ever came to her with dishonorable intentions. Something in him, confusion, maybe even the first flicker of respect, had begun to shift. The countdown, at last, was nearing its true purpose, not punishment, something none of them had expected. While Eva navigated her nights carefully, a different kind of rot was quietly spreading through the family that owned the estate. Chief Augustine Adeyemi Coker was a man who had built an empire on control. Control of shipping routes, control of contracts, control of every room he ever walked into. But control, Eva began to notice in overheard fragments, did not extend to his own marriage. Mrs. Adeyemi Coker spent long afternoons on video calls, behind locked doors, her laughter light and girlish, in a way it never was at the dinner table. She took frequent spa weekends that left her curiously distant from her own husband and curiously attentive to her phone. Staff had learned, long ago, not to ask questions about Madame's private life, but they noticed. They always noticed. The chief, for his part, seemed to sense something was wrong, but chose the same tool he applied to every uncomfortable truth in his household: silence, followed by control, followed by the appearance of a perfect family whenever guests were present. It was this same appearance over substance instinct that had allowed Kelvin's behavior towards staff to go unchecked for years. A family built entirely on performance had no room left for accountability, until the performance itself began to crack from the inside. Something changed in Kelvin after that third night. He began noticing things about Eva he had never bothered to notice about any woman before. The way she hummed old hymns, softly while leroning, never breaking rhythm even under pressure. The way she was unfailingly gentle with the youngest houseboy, a 12-year-old named Chidi, who ran errands after school, sneaking him extra bread when the kitchen staff weren't looking. The way she never once, in all his attempts, spoke a harsh word about him to anyone. She simply, consistently, protected her own dignity without ever attacking his. He found himself lingering near the kitchen at hours he used to spend elsewhere. He found himself asking Madame Comfort careless questions about the quiet one, questions he tried to disguise as idle curiosity. One rainy afternoon, he found Eva sitting alone under the veranda roof, waiting out a downpour before continuing her errands, reading quietly from a small, worn pocket Bible. "You actually read that thing," he said, more statement than question, sitting down at a careful distance this time.
Every day, sir, Eva said, not looking up. Even after everything I put you through. Eva finally lifted her eyes to him, calm, unflinching, but not unkind. Especially after, sir, it is the only reason I did not run away from this job the very first week. Kelvin sat in silence for a long moment, rain hammering the roof above them. I'm sorry, he said finally quietly, the words clearly unfamiliar in his mouth. I don't think I have ever said that to anyone in my life. Eva said nothing, only offered the smallest nod of acknowledgement. But something between them had shifted permanently. What began as pursuit born of entitlement was slowly, awkwardly, transforming into something Kelvin himself did not yet have language for: respect, curiosity, and the early uncomfortable stirrings of genuine feeling for a woman he had never once had to work to impress. It did not take long for Chief Augustine to notice the change in his son. Kelvin was staying home, more instead of disappearing to nightclubs with old schoolmates. He was asking Madame Comfort to adjust the household budget so staff wages could be paid a few days earlier each month. He had, on one unbearable evening, personally driven Eva to a pharmacy after she came down with malaria, waiting outside for over an hour rather than sending a driver. The chief called his son into his study. What exactly is going on with you and that girl? He asked, his voice controlled, but sharp at the edges. Her name is Eva, Papa. I know her name, the chief snapped. I'm asking what you think you're doing. Nothing improper, Kelvin said. For the first time in my life, nothing improper at all. The chief's jaw tightened. You will marry into a family with standing. A senator's daughter, an oil executive's niece, not a cleaner's daughter from a bar. Do you understand what this family has built? Do you understand what people will say? I understand, Kelvin said quietly, that this family built a fortune on people never being allowed to say no to us, and I am tired of being one more thing this family controls. The argument ended with the chief slamming his study door and with a decision quietly forming in Kelvin's mind. A decision that would eventually force everyone in that house, including his own mother, into the open.
3 days before the dinner, you saw at the start of this story, Eva was assigned to deep clean the family's private library, a room rarely touched by regular staff. Tucked on a high shelf sat an old leather Bible, dusty from disuse, belonging to Mrs. Adeyemi Coker. While dusting it, a folded letter slipped from between its pages and fell to the floor. Eva, ever careful with the family's belongings, picked it up to return it to its place, and could not avoid seeing a few lines as she refolded it. It was a letter from a man Eva did not recognize, dated only 4 months earlier, filled with language no married woman should ever be receiving from someone who was not her husband. Eva's hands trembled. She was a cleaner. This was not her business. She placed the letter back exactly where she found it and said nothing to anyone, not out of fear, but out of a conviction that this was not a secret meant to be carried by her. But secrets in a house full of watching eyes rarely stay buried. Chidi, the young houseboy, had seen Eva's troubled expression that day, and, in his innocent way, later mentioned to Kelvin that Sister Eva looked like she saw a ghost in Madame's library. Kelvin, already suspicious of his mother's behavior for months, searched the same shelf himself 2 nights later. He found the letter. He read every line, and something inside him, already cracked open by weeks of watching Eva's quiet integrity, finally broke entirely. Not toward Eva, but toward the family that had spent his entire life punishing honesty while protecting its own hypocrisy. He decided that same night that the family's performance of perfection was going to end at dinner in front of everyone who had ever helped maintain the lie. This brings us back to where we began. The dinner hall, the shattered wine glass, the folded letter shaking in Kelvin's hand. Read it, Papa, Kelvin said, placing the letter directly in front of his father's plate. Read it before you decide which woman in this house deserves to be thrown out. The chief unfolded the paper with visibly trembling hands. His eyes moved across the lines once, twice. The color drained from his face. Mrs. Adeyemi Coker rose from her chair. Kelvin, please, not here. Not like this. You had 4 months to tell him yourself, Kelvin said, his voice steady, but cracking with old, unspoken hurt. Instead, you let him accuse an innocent girl of trapping me, while you were the one keeping secrets in this house. Gasps rippled around the table. The senator's wife pressed a napkin to her mouth. One of the pastors bowed his head, murmuring something under his breath. Eva stood frozen by the kitchen door, wishing desperately she could disappear from a scene she had never wanted to be part of. Chief Augustine slowly folded the letter back along its original creases, his hands shaking now, not with rage, but with something closer to grief. "How long?" he said quietly, not looking up. "How long has this been going on?" "Does it matter now?" Mrs. Adeyemi Koko whispered, tears sliding freely down her face. "You were never home. You were always building something else. I was lonely, Augustine. I was so lonely in this big house." The chief looked, for the first time that evening, toward Eva, really looked at her, not as staff, not as a threat to his family's image, but as a person who had been dragged into a mess she never created. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, the words visibly foreign and difficult for a man who had spent decades never apologizing to anyone beneath his social station. "I was ready to destroy your name, to protect a lie that was never yours to carry." What followed was not immediate forgiveness, but something the household desperately needed. The truth, spoken plainly by the people who had carried it silently for years. Madame Comfort stepped forward first, her voice steady, despite years of swallowed fear. "I have worked in this house for 11 years. I have watched good girls leave in the middle of the night because nobody protected them. Eva is the first one who was strong enough to protect herself, and I'm ashamed it took this long for anyone in this family to notice her worth." Baba Musa, the old gateman, spoke next, his voice rough with age and honesty. "I have seen young master corner girls in this compound before tonight. 3 times. This same girl refused him with more dignity than this whole family has shown in one evening." Driver Emeka added quietly, "I reported an incident to you myself, sir, years ago. You told me boys will be boys. Tonight, your own son is the one exposing the truth you refused to hear then." Even young Chidi, only 12, found his small voice. "Sister Eva shared her food with me when the other staff didn't. She is a good person, sir. Please don't send her away." Finally, Mrs. Adeyemi Koko herself, tears still falling, admitted what no one had asked her to admit. "She never once threatened to expose me. She found that letter days ago and said nothing. She protected my dignity, even though I never protected hers as a member of this staff." Chief Augustine listened to every testimony in silence, his pride visibly collapsing under the weight of evidence he could no longer control, spin, or silence. Finally, he spoke. One sentence, cold, final, the judgment of a man who had built his life on control and was now forced to release it. "This family has failed everyone in this room who ever depended on our protection." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. In the weeks that followed, the Adeyemi Koko household changed in ways nobody expected. Chief Augustine and his wife entered a long, painful period of counseling, rather than an immediate divorce, the chief choosing, for the first time in his marriage, to fight for honesty rather than performance. It was neither instant redemption nor pure punishment. It was the harder, slower work of 2 people deciding whether 26 years of marriage could survive one devastating year of truth. The chief also did something nobody in that house had ever seen him do. He personally tracked down Eva's uncle, Chief Emeka Okafor, and settled the entire debt himself, not as charity thrown carelessly at a poor family, but as a quiet act of restitution for how close his own household had come to destroying an innocent girl's life. He asked, specifically, that the money be transferred in a way that preserved Eva's father's dignity, framed as a delayed business repayment rather than a rescue. Eva's father wept when the debt collector's threats finally stopped arriving. Her mother, upon hearing the news, over a crackling phone call, could only repeat the same words over and over. "God has not forgotten us. God has not forgotten us." Madame Comfort was promoted to head of household staff with real authority, including, for the first time, a direct line to report any misconduct to an independent family board rather than to Chief Augustine alone. And Kelvin, humbled and genuinely changed, asked for nothing rushed. He simply began, slowly and consistently, to earn the kind of trust he had never had to work for before in his life. One quiet evening, months later, Eva sat with Madame Comfort on the back veranda, the same spot where rain had once fallen on a conversation that changed everything. "You did well, my dear," Comfort said, patting her hand gently. "Not every girl who comes through that gate leaves with her dignity intact. You leave with more than that." "I just wanted to be safe," Eva said quietly. "I never wanted any of this attention. I only wanted to send money home and keep the promise I made to God." "Sometimes," Comfort said, smiling, "keeping a quiet promise is exactly what God uses to move mountains nobody thought could move." This is a story about a girl who had every reason to compromise and chose not to. A girl who was poor, vulnerable, far from home, and completely without protection, except for the one thing no one could take from her, her word to God, kept quietly, consistently, without an audience. It is also a story about a family who mistook silence for peace and control for love, until the truth they had buried for years came due all at once. Eva never set out to expose anyone. She never sought revenge, never manipulated the situation to her advantage, never used what she knew as a weapon. Her only weapon was patience, and her only armor was integrity. And in the end, that was enough to outlast every scheme built against her. If this story moved you, if you believe that quiet faithfulness is stronger than any scheme built against it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you want more stories like this one, stories of hidden strength, quiet justice, and faith rewarded in the end, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story might be the one that stays with you the longest.